book, you talk about the self-imposed suffering. And I think that's something that so many people, I mean, the spectrum of suffering during COVID, of course, has been a wild ride for people. But yeah, so several people on here might have not been at our 2021 Game Changer Summit. So I'd love for you to get them up to speed and tell me about self-imposed suffering. So what's your take on this?
Sure. Pain's inevitable. If we're going to be part of the human race, we are going to have loss and we're going to have things that don't go our way that we're disappointed in. And so pain is inevitable, but we extend pain outside of the current moment into suffering. And so suffering is often self-imposed. It's definitely the work of the ego. We take the facts of a situation and we're the ones through our story, we add suffering. We see insult where there isn't any. We add suffering by going back into the past and then projecting out into the future. I think many of us joined a religion of suffering when we were young, and I see us do so many forms of suffering. The ego is so good at suffering. We pre-suffer. It's like somebody will come to me and they're like, oh my gosh, I was just thinking about next week and I'm just really worried about how it's going to go. And I just imagine it's going to be a disaster. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. It's only Tuesday. And how are you today? They're like, I'm awesome. And I'm like, but so you had to go looking for suffering to next Tuesday. And that's what the ego does. The ego tries to rob us of the present moment, which in the present moment, we always have everything we need. I promise. And the ego is like, ooh, I'm feeling good. The ego stays alive by suffering. It's its job by eating anger for lunch, by staying mildly disgruntled, by keeping you the victim. So if in the present moment your life is okay, the ego goes either looking to the past to remember, or the ego goes looking to the future. So that's pre-suffering. A lot of people do post-suffering. I hear this a lot. They're like, with another wave of COVID, they're like, oh, this is going to be awful, pre-suffering. We don't know. And then it may not be awful, but remember what we went through in March of 2020. And they go back and they post-suffer. And unfortunately, everybody is really good at group suffering. In fact, we don't like to suffer alone. If I see somebody on, a Zoom call and they seem pretty happy, I'm like, well, obviously you haven't read the email yet. And I try and destroy their suffering. Everyone out there listening, catch yourself. Notice when you see somebody happy and you're like, well, they must be ignorant of how bad things really are. Let me fill them in. So we resort to suffering, and I think we just unconsciously, we don't even know it. And then we wonder why we're not happy. I'm like, your natural state is happiness once the drama's gone. It's your natural state.